a business model for this. Yeah.
My microphone wasn't on. I was just saying we had a little bit of accident where the latest version of her slides were lost. So while we are trying to locate it, we'll skip to the next presenter. This is Mr. Pradeep Tarakan. He's our colleague at ADB. He's a senior energy specialist in climate change energy division of the Southeast Asia Department. And he's also currently based in Indonesia resident mission in Jakarta. He works on clean energy and climate change issues and responsible for designing and implementing investment programs and technical assistance activity in grid-connected renewable energy sources, energy access, power interconnections, energy efficiency, and carbon capture and storage in Indonesia and several other South Asian countries. Previously, he was a deputy team director for USAID. USAID, as you know, is a co-organizer of this event along with ADB. Eco Asia Clean Development and Clean Program in Bangkok. So without further ado, thank you very much for stepping in. And he will be focusing on Indonesia's country studies and clean energy prospects.
Thank you, Chair. I guess we're getting closer to the cocktail reception, so I'll try to keep this short and interesting and maybe worth your while so you can enjoy a glass of wine later. Speakers before me have come in and given you the regional perspective. What I'd like to do is take you to Indonesia, and we'll drill down a little bit deep into the clean energy prospects and regulations and some of the sort of goal statements and ambitions that the government has, and take a hard look at what it is that they're actually putting in place. I have a captive audience here, so I've got to make a plug for ADB. Indonesia is a significant client for the ADB. We're a big development partner there. Over the next 5 years, we hope to provide up to $4 billion in lending. We're active in a range of areas, from renewable energy to energy efficiency, power interconnections, and carbon capture and storage, which is the next generation of clean energy technologies. We work on analytics and awareness, building capacity. We work on policy-based lending, which is really mainstreaming policy, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And of course, we do the more traditional financing of projects. The Sustainable and Inclusive Energy Program, it's a policy-based lending platform, which is our primary modality for engaging with the government on policy in the space of clean energy. It's a series of loans. The funding goes directly to the general budget. It's not for specific projects. And this is an activity that's supported by multiple lenders led by ADB. So you've got the French Development Agency, you've got the Germans, and you've got World Bank in there. A series of 3 sub-programs between 2015 and 2019. And in 2015, we delivered about $1.35 billion, and we hope to do a similar size loan early part of next year. Disbursement is linked to the government putting in place specific regulatory actions, policies, and programs focused on clean energy. And we look at a range of areas, including improved market-based subsidies, tariffs, reduction of subsidies, improved performance of state-owned enterprises, improving the gas management sector, looking at scaling up of renewable energy and energy efficiency, and finally scaling up electricity access. Indonesia only has about 84% access to electricity, and that's a number we'll have to correct in Bill's slides. And that still means about 20 million people in the country don't have access to power. So what I want to do is take a look at 2 of the recent proclamations by the government on their clean energy targets, and then we compare that to what they're doing in gas supply and renewable energy, and then we'll make some conclusions, and I'll let you decide for yourself if they're actually going to reach those targets or more needs to be done. So this is the INDC, or the Intended Nationally Determined Contribution for Climate Change, submitted at the Paris meeting. And the government has put forth, what is probably the most ambitious statement by a developing country, to say that they're going to lower their emissions by 29% relative to business as usual by 2030, using domestic sources, and up to 41% using international financing. So what does the world think about that? Well, you've got a quote from the WRI that says it's a good start, but improvements are necessary for success. And the Climate Policy Institute says a step forward or a missed opportunity. It's not clear because there aren't enough details. There isn't enough subsector information on how they're going to get to those very large reductions. Okay, and alongside, the government has also announced a 35 gigawatt power development program. To put this in context, the current grid size in Indonesia is about in the mid 50 gigawatt range. So this is a quantum leap in generation capacity. And this is to be put in place by 2019. That's about nearly 600 individual power plants, and it requires an investment of $80 billion, and that does not include land acquisition costs, interest during construction, and taxes. And down below there, you've got a table that lays out in the annual incremental capacity that will be needed to deliver this program, including about 19 gigawatts in year 2019. So this is a huge quantum program, and the government is very serious about it. Now, what you see here is what Indonesia calls the RUPTL, or the Power Development Plan, put out by the National Power Company. This was the old one. This pointer isn't pointing anyway. So this is the old one, and it shows a large concentration of coal, nearly 60%. And when the 35 gigawatt program was announced, it was mostly going to be coal, about 60%. There was a lot of hue and cry, a lot of pushback. The Energy Ministry told the utility, you have to make it cleaner. So now they're in the process of releasing the new RUPTL 2016-2025, and it's got more renewables in it and more gas in it. Therefore, it should be cleaner. And what you see here are the additions. Definitely coal has come down, at least in terms of the plans. You've got more geothermal, more hydro, and other renewables, which is primarily wind and solar. So the question is, that's great in terms of planning, but is there enough gas supply to meet this additional demand? So here's a picture of what this is the allocation of the power plants across the country, and therefore the related gas requirements. Now, these are the two major economic growth engines of the country, Sumatra and Java. The government is very focused on expanding access to energy and expanding economic opportunities to eastern Indonesia. So you've got, if you see there's more addition happening in Sulawesi, in Nusa Tenggara Timur and Barat, and Papua. So then the question is, they need about 1,000 MMSCFD of gas, and that's about 13 gigawatts. But then if you look at the gas balance, it's a whole different story. This is a slightly complex graph, but the point of this is to show the blue line, which is declining, is really the projected gas supply. Okay? And all the bar graphs stack up to what the total demand of gas is for different sectors, subsectors in the country, and export. Because Indonesia is a very large exporter of gas, used to be a bigger proponent of gas exports in the past. So actually, Indonesia is going to switch and become a net gas importer by 2018. If you look at the current trends, and they don't have import licenses in place. So supply is uncertain. So really, are those gas plants really going to happen? And there's need for big infrastructure developments. All over eastern Indonesia, where you see those dotted lines, those are what we call virtual pipelines for small-scale LNG supply. You've got small load centers, you've got complex geography, small island grids. You've got to move a lot of gas, and which means you've got a lot of infrastructure development to be done. But then that doesn't happen unless you have the right policies in place. The government is overdue on its oil and gas law revision. There isn't a gas management policy in place yet. Pricing is uncertain. You've got multiple sources with different prices. You've got a regulated market in terms of gas allocations. And so depending on where you fall on the pecking order, you get access to gas. So all of that will have to change. I won't go into details on the next two slides because I don't want to exceed my 10 minutes. But I've got details in here on what are the main sort of gas sector issues that need to be resolved, policy barriers, and some proposed solutions. And ADB is engaging with the government continuously under our policy loan program to put in place some of these much needed improvements. This is the second slide. Now let's get to renewables. Okay, so wind. Indonesia is not a great country for wind. It straddles the equator, it's common sense. But then again, there is enough wind in certain pockets to merit some attention. Estimates show that there could be as much as anywhere between 1 gigawatt to 10 gigawatts of wind, which is substantial given the size of the grid. And the graphic here shows you the pipeline of projects that are ready to go. These are serious developers with 1 to 2 years of wind data. And in most cases, they have local permissions, in terms of land acquisition permits to build these plants. That totals to about 200 megawatts. And people like the ADBs, private sector operations, and IFC have in principle committed to financing some of these larger projects. Everything is ready to go. What's missing is there isn't a pricing scheme, a feed-in tariff or a ceiling price in place. So the ADB has been working with the government to do the analysis in terms of avoided costs, dispatch, what is the amount of wind that will actually can enter the system across different island grids. And that's a report that's available online, and it covers rooftop solar and wind as well. And we hope that the government, they are working on a tariff, and we hope that they'll be able to put this in place by third quarter this year. And this is sort of the draft. And don't quote me on these numbers and this framework, because we've seen about 7 different variations on this coming out. So this is just to give you a sense of what they're thinking rather than the actual numbers. They're looking at 3 different size classes: less than 100 kilowatt, 100 kW to 10 megawatt, and then above 10 megawatt. And they've got 3 regions in the country. Region 1 is really the large islands with a lot of demand, a lot of generation, complex grids that can take more wind. And then as you go to 2 and 3, you're going out to the interiors, remote islands, smaller grids, which can't take a lot of wind. And also the cost of generation will go up because of logistical challenges. And those are the sort of numbers you're looking at, ranging from anywhere between 14 to 18 US cents for the non-remote areas. And that's very much in line with both in terms of what the production costs of wind are in those areas, and it's well within what we call the utilities avoided cost. So there's an economic benefit from actually signing up power purchase agreements at those prices, at least for the first set of projects. As we know, costs do go down once scale builds up, but you also need to provide incentives to the first movers to get into the game. Because we don't know the cost yet. The market, you don't have discovery of price. You've got to do the first few projects to actually, and it's no point saying, you got 4 cents a kilowatt hour in Brazil for wind, so therefore Indonesia should be actually only pricing it at 4 cents. It's not going to happen. Moving on to solar, it's actually shocking that for a country that has so much sun, there is probably less than 5 megawatts of solar capacity on the ground in Indonesia. This is the map that shows, the redder it is, that more of the radiation, solar radiation is available, resources available. So there's plenty of opportunities in the country. Again, there is no price in place, but the government is working on a regulation, and we're hopeful that they'll put it in place in the next couple of months, because the government has planned for 5 gigawatts by 2019 as part of their new RUPTL, which I showed you earlier. So they're looking at a pricing which is similar to wind, 14 cents to 25 cents, depending on the region. And they're also looking at a quota system with a first-come, first-served basis, as long as it meets some prerequisites. And there's going to be online registration. So it's all going to be a transparent process. Now, is it going to lead to a gold rush? But then the quota system makes sure that there isn't unlimited solar PPAs that are going to be signed up. So we hope that it's going to be out by July. I am now in the red zone as far as time is concerned. So let's move to the next slide. Geothermal, very quickly. This is Indonesia has the world's largest geothermal resource. Everybody loves geothermal. But look at this. 27 gigawatts of potential is what you read about. Last year, capacity addition, that's the third graph from the left, 0. 2016, possibly 0. Not a whole lot is happening there. Again, ADB is trying to do its best to help put up capacity. That's a study we put out last year called Unlocking the Potential for Geothermal. We helped the government put in place a pricing scheme, primarily a ceiling price with tendering, so that it's the avoided cost of the utility by region, and then you will have an auction process by which bidders would come in at prices below that. And we're also actually financing specific projects. You've got the list of projects there, including the world's largest geothermal project, Sarula, 330 megawatts. That's by our private sector operations. A couple of things, again, regulatory. The government set up a geothermal fund. Geothermal is like oil and gas. You've got drilling risk, that's equity-based. You can lose your money. And very rarely will anybody finance that. So the government, we worked with the government to put in place a fund. They don't follow all of the guidance that was provided, but $250 million of public money was put into the fund in 2012. As on date, not a single dollar has been spent, because they haven't been able to develop the standard operating procedures and work out the fund flow arrangements. And also they're behind on, now they've decided to change from a ceiling price to a feed-in tariff, and we can talk about that, if that's the good thing or not. But, and also revenue sharing with local governments has not been put in place yet. Conclusions, as I showed you, ambitious targets and goals have been set. However, the requisite regulations are not in place. We hope they'll be putting it in place over the next 12 to 15 months. That's the only way they're going to meet their goals. And concessional funds are not enough by themselves. You need the right enabling environment, commitment from the government, interagency coordination, and so on. The other speakers have mentioned that as well. There's a lot of debate going on worldwide on feed-in tariffs versus ceiling prices, a tendering which is more economically more efficient. I think, in the developing country which is trying to do the first 10 or 20 or 100 megawatts of renewable energy, you want to make it easy, have a fixed feed-in tariff, let the first movers come in, and then adjust things. And in countries where you don't have cost recovery tariffs in place, you've got to have clarity on where the subsidy is going to come from, and that it's going to be guaranteed year after year for the period of that feed-in tariff provision. And finally, in case of renewable energy such as geothermal, where you've got significant upfront risk, you have to have in place some sort of public funding for de-risking those projects. And also in the case of things like wind, which could be in remote areas, you need transmission access. Sometimes the utility has to step in and put in place those things and not require the IPP or the private sector to do it. With that, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pradeep. And now I invite her to come to the podium again. Sorry about the glitch. I hope his presentation can be pulled up now. Yes, that's the current version.
Yes, good afternoon. I'll make it fast. Everybody wants to go for a drink. Co-generating for local electricity. That is the co-product of an industry which I promote very much to do here, so in most of the Asian countries. And that is based on the use of biomass residues or agricultural residues, forestry residues, or whatever you like. The advantage is, if you are a producer, you can circumvent, not circumvent, I'm not in the circumventing of regulations, but you can bypass much of the regulations you need for normally for producing low-priced products like an electricity. I'm more on how to do it than on what regulations you have to do. Most of the other panel partners already explained how it was with the regulations. I say that the advantage of using the biomass resources, because for the type of products I'm producing a renewable type of fuel, that I can source from many different biomass sources, including waste, including forestry residues, including furniture residues like the sawdust and the other materials, and convert that into a consistent, simple type of fuel which has much of the same qualities as coal, and it is called biocoal. And the use of the many resources makes for sure that I will have it available. And why do you use the biomass? For environmental reason. You have to do something with your waste. So if you are a furniture industry which makes 40% of your incoming material is gone is going into residues, you can turn that out turn that into a pelleting, which you can burn in a conventional coal-fired plant, for example. But now your coal is from biomass, so it is carbon neutral. And if you use the coal in integrated gasification combined cycle plants, you have a far higher efficiency, and you can deliver far more power from the same amount of feedstock you give. So it has economical reasons. You get you can introduce more diversity into your forestry industries. You can use the waste to produce the fuel, and the fuel you can use for a part yourselves, for drying out the material or drying out agricultural products like a rice, if you have to dry rice, or cook And there is enough use for the heat you are generating normally normally from your fossil fuel materials. We would like to address two points in what we like to do. We want to export all the waste in the form of a fuel type, which is a renewable fuel type. The potential markets are typical countries. We don't have that much biomass, but have a high energy requirement. Those are, for example, Japan and Europe. Both don't have enough land to grow enough biomass. They do have, of course, a forestry industry, but it's far too small to produce enough residues for using as a material. So they are, for a large part, based on coal. If you replace that coal by the biocoal, they can switch over to a renewable fuel as well, and you can make, as an ASEAN country, as an exporting agricultural country, you can make some money on fuel exports instead of trying to get rid of it by dumping it in the rivers, which happens quite a bit over here. And in the same time, the conversion process of the raw materials that you can use for producing your own heat you need and the electricity you generate out of that conversion process at the same time. What you left over for your local consumption for the materials you produce, 10% of the energy is available locally for distribution to other parts of the community. This is the way how we suppose we do it. It looks like 3 sections. It is actually one integrated plant. The section is that there is a buffer between each and every step of the process. So you have buffering capacity, so you can play around with the demand for your local electricity. So if there is a high amount of local requirement of a high amount of local electricity, you produce a lot of heat and gas in your combined heat and power plant, and you don't use the electricity in your plant yourself, but you buffer it till a time that there is not so much request from the local community for electricity, and then you put in your pelleting machinery to work for consuming the electricity you can generate at that time. So you can finish the amount of products you want to export. This is more or less the product process. I don't want to go too long about it. It is about drying, about torrefaction is the process called to make it into the biomass, so that you end up with a product which is hydrophobic, so you can store it outside, which is good enough grindable to be used in coal-fired plant, or you can, and it is a smokeless type of fuel, so you can also use it in your cooking pot material. And it can obey the international ISO standards, so it can be imported and exported to every other country in this world. To set up such, you have to choose between large scales and small scale, and the problem is for the small scale is that the payback time is long. So most investors want to go in large scale, which gives you a logistic problem for how do you get enough residues together. Anyway, the large scale, you can always build large scale if you aggregate enough in one environment and you make a good connection, logistic connection between every and other of your plants. Every plant can generate, let's say for a 50,000 ton plant, can generate a 3 megawatt electrical extra for available to the local communities. Its output product is much higher. 50,000 tons can produce for enough power for 15,000 households. In regions of where the production is, you maybe only have 1,500 households. So you can run all those households, provide all those households with power from the 10% you are already left over. And you have available for 15,000 household product to sell outside. Not necessarily outside the Philippines, but or Thailand or Cambodia or Vietnam. But you can also bring it over to the coal-fired power plants here in the same country. There are lots of advantages by playing around with by these type of feedstock you have. You can also regulate the power consumption of the production plant. So you can you're creating a variable baseload for your grid. And thank you. And then the very last picture, a Sankey diagram, just to show for the very small on the right-hand side down there that the efficiency of such a combined plant, that the losses are about 4 to 6%. So you have an overall efficiency of your plant for 96%. And that is increased very, very high. In normal, energy generation, for a coal-fired plant, you're about 34%. For an integrated gasification, you're about 50%, if you have a good one. And yeah, for the natural gas peak power plants, they don't get any further as 22%. But if you have a regulating power plant with an overall efficiency of about 96%, I think you're doing good business then at that time. And that is it, thank you.
Thank you, Her. Maybe some engineers amongst you come visit and have a chat with her after the event.
They can try to taste the biomass if they like. But
oh, that's biomass you brought?
Yeah, that's the bio-coal.
Bio-coal, okay. Yeah.
I can distribute it, but...
Yeah, well, you can also visually see what bio-coal looks like, yeah. Okay, thank you. Now we invite you to ask questions to the distinguished panelists. I know we are only standing between you and the reception, so we do understand if you don't have any questions, but it'll be great if you have some, because we did have a very interesting mix of speakers providing differing points of view. Anybody would like to ask something? Oh, yes, gentleman there. I hope the microphone is working.
Hi, my name is Jiting Lo with ELO Solutions. I have a quick comment and a question. So I want to thank Sarah to bring up the fact that feed-in tariff may not always be the best solution. So I'll share that. I'm from Canada, and in Ontario, a few years ago, the Ontario government produced what they call the best feed-in tariff program in the world. So they would pay you 81 cents per kilowatt hour of your system that's less than 10 kilowatt. So it essentially promotes a lot of the small solar installation. As a result of that, this is now 5-6 years later, the electricity cost for every customer has gone up more than 20% because of the exact problem that you were addressing. So I'm really happy to hear that. So we all in agreement that the solar price has gone down quite a bit, and that we potentially don't need any more subsidies for solar. However, we still have these other technologies, biomass, waste energy, maybe tidal, that are not at that economically feasible price. So what's your thought on for those other technologies that's not quite ready? What is the best policy to encourage those installations, if not feed-in tariff?
Okay, I'm probably exactly the wrong person to ask that question of, because if you ask me what I actually believe, then what I actually believe is that we should wait for some idiot like Germany to go and develop them to a great level like they did with solar, and then the rest of the world can pick it up when the prices have come down. But I will try and answer your question slightly more seriously, because that was a somewhat tongue-in-cheek comment. The first thing I would say is that when you're trying as a country to decide what things you should support, the first thing I think you should do is think about what of these new technologies fit with your own energy mix. So, for example, here in the Philippines, solar aligns really well with the electricity demand because we have a big peak in the middle of the day, and solar generates most of its power in the middle of the day, which means that solar is valuable. On the other hand, wind generates in the types of seasons when we need less electricity, and it generates in the middle of the night when we need less electricity. So when I look at the Philippines, the reason I talked only about solar is I don't think the Philippines should be focusing on wind, because wind doesn't align with what they need. Now, if I'm in New Zealand, and I used to live in New Zealand, the opposite is exactly true. In New Zealand, the wind resource has been totally economic and has been installed by private generators without any subsidies since before I lived there, and I left there in 2007 because it's just such a windy country. I don't know enough about Canada to know exactly what Canada aligns with, possibly not solar, possibly wind, and I know you have a lot of hydro. But yes, the first thing I would do is figure out, what things might make sense, and then maybe give them some grants so that you can actually get an industry off the ground, rather than to try and force vast numbers of feed-in tariffs or other subsidies for things that may or may not be economic. So that's where I would start answering that question, and I could probably speak for longer than my entire presentation, so I'll stop just there.
And I agree that you always need to look at the resources and plan for the renewable energy applications. But if we look at the climate change, the pressing issues that we need to reduce our emission now and not wait for a new technology to now become mainstream. So how do we deal with that? So I think at some point we need to take some compromise and really encourage renewable. So for example, in Philippines, which I don't know that much in terms of the mix, so wind may not be the best solution, but that can still offset some of your current generation, more energy intensive or emission intensive generation. So that combined with storage, which may not be the most economical, but it could contribute to that reduction goals that has been said. So how
it could, but if I take the money I spend on wind and I spend it on solar instead, I get more megawatts out, and that's the point. Money is limited, none of us have unlimited money, so that you need to focus on the most cost-effective solutions, even if they're not economic today. If you look at what are most likely to be economic because of how they align with your geography or something else, and focus on those rather than just randomly thinking that all renewables are the same and all ought to be supported, I think then you focus your money more carefully and ensure that something gets developed that fits with your country. So it's not the same answer for every place. Every place would have a different answer to your question.
Thank you, Sarah. I think there's a gentleman standing by the microphone. Would you proceed, sir?
My name is Roberto Brizola. I work with a non-profit in the Philippines. We work with local governments in setting up showcase RE facilities. My question is, I didn't hear much from the panel about net metering. And it seems to me from the experience of the United States, from which it originated, it is arguably as good, if not better, than FIT, because, for example, in the Philippines, where FIT rates are lower than grid rates, the consumer who sets up a solar panel gets a better deal if he has net metering instead. In addition, with net metering, you don't have to worry about new meters, about all other additional changes, because when it was first tried in the US, you simply plug if it's the right inverter, you plug it into your home outlet and you're in. You don't need a battery, you don't need it. So it's the lowest cost way of setting up a solar system in your house, and will save you money right away. And net metering makes that very easy. So
can I answer your question before you keep going? Because my entire presentation was about net metering and about why it's one of the worst ways to encourage solar renewables. Because fundamentally, it's about stealing money from one customer to give it to another. in order that the one customer who can afford to put the solar panel on his roof gets a benefit, and the guy down the street who can't afford to put a solar panel on his roof ends up paying for the rich guy to put a solar panel on his roof. So we at the Lantau Group are pretty strongly anti-net metering, and we actually have clients who are renewable developers, rooftop renewable developers, who are also anti-net metering. Net metering was a good idea when you thought you were going to get 1 or 2 solar panels in each town and you needed something quick and cheap to get them started. But it's not when it's actually become so mainstream that now vast amounts of the grid are not paying network charges and somebody else has to pick up the network charges. So I'm afraid I completely disagree with your assessment, and I realize it's an unpopular position to take.
Just a very quick response, not to pursue the debate, but just to state our position in the Philippines, that we've looked at it and we thought that net metering would be the best way to encourage entry into solar, distributed solar in the Philippines. So I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your comment. Any other panelists would like to respond? Okay. I see the line forming. Sir, please go ahead. Oh, actually, you're right. You were there earlier. Please go ahead.
Don't worry, I'm patient. Sorry. Sorry, Sarah, I keep you busy. First of all, I'm German. Thank you for calling us idiots. But I'm glad the Australians were the first fools to follow us and just basically did overtake us now. And so this is a balance now. Okay.
We do have more sun in Australia than you did, it has to be said.
Yeah, and more space as well, of course. What I was going to ask you, I mean, I fully agree with you with the network charges, that the network charges are a key issue in the deployment. And but what do you think about the situation that as we have seen in the development of the prices of solar, the dramatic drop we've seen in many presentations, in many sessions, dramatic drop over the last few years, and this process continues, hasn't stopped yet. Yeah. The other technology where this process has just started, and we will have an equal dramatic price drop, is in storage technology.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So with that on the horizon, I don't care about the network anymore. I'll just go completely off grid. And
I would have to say that I have a strong sympathy for your argument. Now, the Lantau Group is owned by myself and Mike Thomas, and Mike completely dislikes your argument, but I actually have quite a lot of sympathy for it. And one of my concerns is that we're going to end up building excess network now that will become stranded in the future, because when battery technology becomes cheaper, then you will not need as much network. But I can bring myself and Mike's views together by basically saying that what's really important in all of us when we're trying to plan the future of our electricity systems as a whole is making sure we have all of the correct information and we take account of that information in our planning and our analysis, and we do and redo our analysis quite frequently. Because I think what we've seen with solar and what we're seeing with batteries is that the world isn't changing, in a 5-year plan mode, it's changing in a 1-month plan mode. And that we actually need to be thinking about future-proofing our grids. And the way we believe you best future-proof your entire system is by having all of your costs cost-reflective, so that everyone can see the real cost of all of the aspects of the system, and that helps them to make better decisions in the future. Yep. So that's how I bring those two different views together.
I can follow you, and I tend to agree with you. However, as we experienced in the past, the market moves faster than we can think.
That's why you hire consultants.
Yes, that's why I'm here. The funny story, I've just had a week ago a conversation with a developer, and the developer for residential homes. They're planning the next generation house, and that is completely off-grid developments. And they happen in this part of the world, in Southeast Asia.
And they are already happening in Australia. And I know network companies, I know the chairman of a network company in Australia who says he believes his biggest business risk going forward is people leaving the grid.
Yep.
But fundamentally, one of the reasons those people are leaving the grid is because of the distortionary network pricing, and that's being driven by the regulations. And without the distortionary network pricing, then not as many people would leave the grid. So I want people to leave the grid when it is actually cheaper to do so, but not when it is not cheaper to do so, it only looks like it's cheaper to do so because of the distortionary pricing.
I disagree. That may be true in Australia, may be true in Europe. But in this part of the world, people leave the grid because of unreliable power supply.
Yeah, can I just...
That's a fair point.
I just want to add, sorry, may I?
Sure.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Pratik.
thank you to our friend from Germany. I think we different strokes for different people. We really should be careful before we use the same sort of palette to wash across the entire world. Australia, California has a problem of huge amount of rooftop uptake and network charge issues, not so much in Indonesia or the Philippines or Vietnam or Cambodia. In Jakarta, you're importing LNG to meet daytime peak load. That's silly. You should be having rooftop solar to do so. And there are 40 million people, 14% of 250 million in Indonesia, eastern part of the country, that don't have power, and they've got humongous amounts of solar. So why would they not use rooftop solar to do so? So I would caution against that message being sent out that rooftop solar with net metering is a bad idea.
But let me push back slightly on that. And I don't completely disagree with you, but your example in Indonesia, should you be using rooftop solar at $1,900 a megawatt, or should be using utility solar at nearly half the price?
You can't get land in Java. Build large-scale solar.
Okay. No, that's a good answer.
Okay. Hello, my name is Kia from Nexon. I have a question about net metering. I'm actually just kidding. No, I have a different question. So we got to hear a lot of great presentations just now about markets and renewable energy, bank programs, regulations. And this all seems really great, but what I'm curious about in our transition for ASEAN to a clean energy future, where does the role of the consumer come in? What opportunities are there to mobilize people in each of these countries to shift towards clean energy? I'd be interested to hear from all the panelists.
Anybody wanted to take up that? Oh, okay.
Let me
Sarah,
get
sorry, Sarah, you've got a lot of
Well, he
now.
did say his question was about net metering, which was what my presentation was about. I'll only say I think consumers make good decisions when you give them information. So I would say make sure consumers have all the information they need, and then allow them to choose what they want to do.
So someone who's out in the village, okay, 200 kilometers away from the nearest load center, who has no electricity now, okay, who doesn't have internet, obviously, therefore can find this information. Nobody's going to bring them that information, but you're going to say, okay, don't put solar on your roof because, against this product. If somebody comes and says, if you have excess, I'm going to let you put this into the mini grid. I mean, the only thing I agree with what you've said, okay, is continue to redo your analysis and get the data up there. Okay, one of the wonderful things about, okay, Pradeep's presentation is that if you look at Indonesia, okay, it is a microcosm of the ASEAN community, okay? If you look at Indonesia, you will see parts of the islands for which grid connection is much lower than other parts of the country, okay? And so you can look and say, okay, it's Myanmar where grid connection is 30%, okay? And it's even in the best forecast, okay, in 15 years, okay, it's not going to break 50%, okay? But in the meantime, okay, the urban areas are sucking in all the generation, okay? And there's not enough power in the plants to go out to the rural areas. So if you put a lot of rooftop, okay, solar in the urban areas, okay, there will be more electrons to go down the line, okay, to get to some of the rural areas.
To be clear, I didn't say don't put rooftop solar in. I said don't do it just because of your netback pricing mechanism.
Okay. The reality is that there is no sort of universal ASEAN community. There's an enormous difference both at the country level and then within the countries, okay? And if you want to do good analysis, okay, that it has to reflect that. And as all economists know, sometimes we can get first best solutions, sometimes we can get second best solutions, and sometimes we have to even settle for third best solutions because we can get them done, okay, either because of the political constraints or something else, okay? And when you're in a situation where there's vast numbers of people who don't have any access, okay, and there's political as well as economic forces against trying to make that all happen, you have to reflect that, okay? And if you could have to settle for second best or third best, I say settle for it, because the outage costs on people that are on the grid, okay, looking at on the grid already and without it, okay, are very high, much higher than the supply costs, and not having any of it, okay, means no livelihoods and lots of other stuff. If you look at what the Durst Foundation, the Durst Corporation does in New York City, okay, they're putting curtain wall solar, and because their value as retail people, okay, is that they've got customers inside that can't even take a reliability that the Con Ed can offer them, okay? They want to have systems wired so that there's no even milliseconds of outage, okay? Because they've got traders doing other stuff or whatever, because the value that they put on those electrons and the capacity is different than others, okay? I'm saying,
I think you're completely agreeing with me,
excuse
actually.
me. Please, both of you.
No, he's saying, I'm saying nothing different than what that guy is saying. He just thinks I am. That's all.
May I ask both of you to perhaps take it offline, because we are out of time. I'm glad everybody had a very exciting debate. It was more than I was expecting at this late time. But and some of the views that have been expressed here are not necessarily ADB's view. I hope you understand this. And I hope you all have a great time at the reception outside. And thank you very much for participating in this wonderful session.